An empire of crime that made more money than governments. They bribed cops, politicians, and even presidents. Their influence was so vast it led to wars and economic crises. So who were these mysterious criminals and what did they do? It all started in Sicily at the end of the 19th century. The island had become an important hub for shipping and trade, but with little government control, this made it the perfect place to smuggle things like wine and tobacco. And soon, local gangs began to spring up everywhere. These gangs would go on to become known as the Mafia. The word mafia is thought to have come from the Sicilian word mafi, meaning refuge or protection. This is fitting because one of the main things the Mafia did was offer protection to people who could unprotect themselves. These could be poor farmers or merchants who needed help moving their products to market, or perhaps local businessmen who wanted some muscle when dealing with other companies. Of course, in exchange for this protection, the Mafia would take a cut of their clients' profits. If they didn't pay up, then they would face the consequences. This could be anything from having your business destroyed to being sent to the hospital with a broken bat. With time, the Mafia would grow to dominate much of Sicily, and they would begin to expand out from here into mainland Italy and eventually around the world. Today there are Mafia organizations in nearly every country in the world. In America alone, there are 5 main families. These include the Bonanno crime family, the Colombo crime family, the Gambino crime family, the Genovese crime family, and the Lucchese crime family. So how exactly does the Mafia make money? Well, like most businesses, the Mafia diversifies its portfolio. Back in the day, extortion was a major source of income, especially in Italy, where the Mafia would charge businesses for protection, just like we mentioned before. But the American Mafia soon found a better way to make money: gambling and prostitution. For example, during the Prohibition era, mobsters made a fortune supplying illegal alcohol. Since the government couldn't sell alcohol, mobsters took this opportunity to make a profit. At this time, they also became heavily involved in bootlegging, which is the business of smuggling and selling illegal liquor. There was also a lot of money to be made in smuggling. For example, during World War II, the Mafia smuggled many Jewish refugees out of Italy to save their lives. And in the years since, they've smuggled all sorts of things from drugs and weapons to stolen cars and endangered animals. Even today, the Mafia is believed to be involved in white-collar crimes such as fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. And with so many areas of income, it's no wonder the Mafia has become one of the richest criminal organizations in the world. In fact, some believe that the Mafia actually made more money than some governments. According to Forbes, the Italian Mafia alone brings in around $1.3 billion per year. That's the same as the GDP of Tuvalu, a country of 12,000 people. And the Chinese triads bring in an estimated $140 billion per year. To put that into perspective, the triads make more money than the entire economy of Portugal. But how exactly did they become so rich? Well, one of the main reasons is because the Mafia knows how to stay under the radar. Unlike terrorist groups such as ISIS or the Taliban, the Mafia doesn't carry out high-profile attacks. Instead, they operate behind the scenes and try to avoid drawing attention to themselves. This makes it much harder for the police to build cases against them. For example, in Italy, the Mafia often relies on the help of the public to gather intelligence on the police. When the police are corrupt, the Mafia will often leave gifts on their doorstep such as food or expensive clothes. If this doesn't work, then they might resort to more extreme methods such as threatening the police or their families. This might sound scary, but the police are usually able to handle it. After all, they deal with dangerous criminals every day. However, when the police don't cooperate, then it can lead to serious consequences. This happened in the 1980s when 2 anti-Mafia prosecutors, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, were killed by the Mafia. Another reason why the Mafia is so hard to beat is because of something called, which is Italian for silence, is the Mafia code of silence that forbids them from testifying against each other in court. Now, even if the police do manage to gather evidence against a Mafia member, they're unlikely to get them to testify. If they do speak out, then they'll be shunned by their fellow Mafia members and may even be killed. However, despite how elusive they are, the police have managed to take down some major Mafia bosses over the years. In 2006, the FBI arrested and later sentenced to life imprisonment one of the most powerful mobsters of the modern era, a man known only as the Professor. He was the head of the Italian-American Mafia. He was even said to be involved in the 1978 murder of Pope John Paul I. Then there's the story of Matteo Messina Denaro, another powerful Italian mobster who managed to evade the authorities for decades. He was finally caught in 2021 after being on the run since 1993. But while these arrests are certainly victories for the police, they're only small battles in a much bigger war. The truth is, the mafia is incredibly difficult to defeat because it's deeply ingrained in society. For example, in Italy, the mafia often works with politicians to get what they want. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes the mafia will help the politicians get elected in exchange for certain policies being introduced. However, this isn't always the case. Often the mafia will blackmail or threaten the politicians into doing what they want. Either way, this kind of corruption is extremely hard to stamp out. In fact, it was so bad in the 1990s that the Italian government had to introduce a law known as leg apis, or the clean hands law. This law made it easier to prosecute politicians who worked with the mafia. However, even this wasn't enough to stop the corruption. In 2008, an Italian politician, a man named Giulio Tremonti, admitted that the mafia was still controlling parts of southern Italy. And even today, the government is still trying to fight back. In recent years, the VA cracked down on businesses that work with the mafia and have even introduced a special tax for people who live in areas controlled by the mafia. This is in the hopes that it will make it harder for them to launder money. But despite all these efforts, the mafia is still a major problem in Italy. In fact, it's believed that the mafia is now more powerful than ever. One reason for this is because they've become more professional. In the past, the mafia was made up of a bunch of small gangs that operated independently. However, today the mafia is much more organized. In fact, many experts believe that the mafia is now a legitimate business with a clear hierarchy, accounting practices, and marketing strategies. For example, the Russian mafia has become a major player in the global arms trade. Meanwhile, the Japanese Yakuza have a strong presence in the drug trade. Another reason why the mafia is so powerful is because they've become more diverse. In the past, the mafia was mostly made up of Italian men. However, today the mafia is a truly global organization with members from all walks of life. In fact, there are even female mafia groups, such as the Pink Panthers. This group is made up of female thieves who specialize in stealing expensive jewelry. They've been active in Europe, Asia, and the United States. So what is the future for the mafia? Well, as long as there is money to be made, the mafia will likely continue to thrive. They've already survived for over a century, and in that time they've managed to corrupt politicians, infiltrate businesses, and even start wars. If they can survive all that, then they can survive anything. Now it's time to make your voice heard. Comment below. Which mafia boss is the most powerful? Don't forget to subscribe for more videos about the most secretive organizations in the world. Thanks for watching.